Well, it's finally here. The highly anticipated limited edition Smartwool and Grateful Dead collection has finally dropped exclusively at smartwool.com.
You may know Smartwool as the go-to brand for all things merino wool, from socks to base layers. Smartwool has been keeping people comfortable outside for decades with some of the softest and ethically sourced merino wool out there.
Well, Smartwool's limited edition collection and collaboration with the Grateful Dead is back by popular demand right in time for the holidays.
From t-shirts and hoodies to beanies and socks, now you can have the next level comfort of Smartwool with all your favorite iconic Grateful Dead designs. Shop the drop exclusively at smartwool.com and get it before it's gone for good. Gone for good. That's Smartwool, SMARTWOOL.com.
Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 38. 38, Benji, of Undermine, brought to you by Osiris Media. I'm Tom Marshall, your tour guide, your Phish tour guide, as we revisit, relive, redefine, underline, and of course, undermine Phish's prized Fall 97 tour. We're diving into each show of that tour on its 25th anniversary. And if you're just joining us, we began this season with 25 shows from the 90s that got us to this point. And so here we are blazing through the Fall 97 tour, show by show, song by song, moment by moment. And in real life, we go hurtling from birth until the end, and everything in between is just a blur of high chairs, seesaws, number 2 pencils, summer vacations, prom night, college dorms. And before we get to the wife, the kids, and the picket fence, there was Phish Tour. Phish Tour was in the 90s, and it was a moment that many of us lived before Big Cypress ushered in the new millennium and a change of scene. But here at Undermine, the moment never ends. Making use of the company flux capacitor that we have to share with the whole Osiris building here, we've set the Undermine DeLorean to December 2nd, 1997. So right now you're witnessing a trail of flames rising from the tread marks as we suddenly race down Broad Street, Philadelphia, in the present past tense. It's December 2nd, 25 years later. The doors open DeLorean style, and out of the haze and dry ice from the passenger side, who's that striking silhouette that's emerging? Well, if you're joining us on YouTube right now, you already know that it's my co-host, Benji Eisen. And you also already know everything else above was just a metaphor. There is no real company flux capacitor.
Well, that's a damn shame.
And if you're listening instead of watching, that's Benji. Hi, Benji.
Hi, Tom. There's probably no DeLorean either.
No DeLorean.
Damn it. The next thing you're going to tell me is that we don't even have Smartwool or Section 119.
I'm definitely not going to tell you that because we still do have product placement.
Well, okay. On the night we're talking about, Section 119 didn't even exist yet, so I don't need to be jealous of your donut threads, but I am anyway. Smartwool actually may have existed, but smartphones did not. Right. So if they did, if they existed back then, I would have this photo from the floor of the Philadelphia Spectrum where I was for the show. And instead, all I have is I have the ticket stub, and there's a black X scribbled on the back.
Oh, did you get an autograph from somebody?
No, I got a warning from a security guard. Any more dancing in the aisle, and I would have been 86th from the home of the 76ers. So, in addition to my ticket stub, I have some really strong memories of this night, not just of Phish at the Philadelphia Spectrum, but also of the late night show at the Disco Biscuits at the Theater of Living Arts. As a matter of fact, Tom, in addition to all the other standout picture postcard memories that I have of this night, I believe that this was the fateful night when I handed you an Uno card that my friend Uno Clay gave me in the parking lot earlier on in the night.
You did. And I remember thinking, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? But it didn't really matter, actually, until like several shows later when I started seeing more and more Uno cards. And then someone online made the assertion that Tom Marshall started the Uno card craze. And that's when I had to put my foot down and object. And I may even have said some terrible things about Uno cards. So I'm sorry about that. But in retrospect, over the years, I found out that people can say worse things about you online, and that Uno card rumors are probably pretty harmless.
I think Uno cards are probably pretty harmless, but it was a big night for me. I handed you what essentially is just a card from a card game, and a totally arbitrary action that accidentally ignited a whole Uno card conspiracy theory. And then later on that same night, I escorted Mike Gordon backstage to blaze with the disco biscuits, since I was in the odd position of I had credentials and he didn't. So I think now I've mentioned the disco biscuits as many times as I've mentioned Phish so far in this episode. And, Tom, there's probably no reason for that whatsoever. Let me ask you this on the same thread. Tom, do you know who our guest is today?
Of course I do. And even though our listeners already saw his name in the episode title, today's guest is, of course, Marc Brownstein, a.k.a. Brownie from the Disco Biscuits. I also call him Marc. Marc is a member of Electron and Star Kitchen 2. Those are his other two bands. And it should be noted, he co-founded Headcount along with Osiris pal Andy Bernstein. And his pandemic pivot that's taking all his time now, all his creativity when he's not on stage or writing music, is his company Lively. And so he's got better things to do than just sit and wait for us in the waiting room.
That's very true. And, I am absolutely looking forward to you bringing him in here and talking to him about this, 12-97 show. But first, to our friends out there listening, if you're enjoying ourselves, then please help us to continue to entertain you by supporting the show via our new Osiris Premium offering. For what basically amounts to pocket change, you get bonus episodes of this show, as well as HF Pod, access to the entire Under the Scales catalog, ad-free episodes, meet and greets, and more. Check out osirispod.com/premium or click on the link in the show notes.
Thanks for saying that, Benji. I agree with everything you just said.
Tom, one day I will quote you on that. But you can go ahead and summon Brownie from the raging and debaucherous backstage room that we don't really have, I'll take this opportunity to remind everyone that this season has been a really special opportunity to hear and to share stories from, the tour where Phish destroyed America. So if you have your own Fall 97 thoughts, and if you were there, you definitely do, then please send them to us. You can do that by making a 1-minute video clip. It's got to be that short, but we will hear it as long as you post it on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook and tag Osiris Pod. It's not really a contest, but one lucky entrant will win a handwritten copy of the lyrics to Ghost from our friend Tom Marshall.
And that's me. And this, for those watching on YouTube, is Marc Brownstein. Hi, Marc, and welcome to Undermine.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Superb. Hi, thanks for joining us, man. We'll just jump right in here. And we've been doing this with most of the guests from this season, and I know people will actually be interested in hearing your answer. Give us the context you had for Phish in 1997, starting with telling us, if you could, when your first show was and what you remember about it.
Oh, wow. That is some question. It's kind of a loaded question because for me, it's like I almost, when Benji asked me to come on this podcast to talk about Fall 97, I reluctantly agreed. And the reason was, sometimes they say a mark of a man is that he's able to sometimes admit that he's wrong, right? Or the mark of a human is that they're able to look back and admit that they were wrong about something. In this case, I got into Phish in 1992 heavily at college. I had known about them in 89, 90, 91 from being in the New York City music scene. They would come through and they played, I think, Wetlands once and I missed it. And they played like the Palladium on 14th Street, which was like right around the corner from my house. And one of my friends was like, I'm going to see Phish. And, I at that point it was like Fishbone. And they were like, no, Phish. And I was like, with a PH, right? So that was like what was happening then. And I got all the way to college and I hadn't seen Phish but I got really deeply into them my freshman year at Penn. And then by the sophomore year, so 1993 was my first show, and that was at Roseland in New York City, 2, 5, and 6, I think it was 1993, 2 nights at Roseland. And we've talked about this because that was right when Rift came out. That was like I guess Providence was right before that, and this was like maybe the 3rd and 4th show of the shows where they're playing the Rift album almost in its entirety over a 2-night run. Mind blowing. Absolutely mind blowing, life changing. Obviously, if you were to objectively look at where I am and what I do and what my life has turned into, this was obviously like the pinnacle, life changing, life altering moment. And it's like they say that if you're like on a path and you're moved off of that path, even just a fraction of a degree, over a long period of time, you're going to end up, in a completely different place. And that certainly is true to this case. So then a lot of shows, 1993 in the fall, I did McAllister Auditorium and the show where Dave Matthews Band opened for Phish in Pelham, Alabama, which was, I think it was Pelham or Oak Mountain Amphitheater, wherever that is, Pelham, Alabama. Which I could do a whole podcast just on those 2 nights. You know what I mean? Like the story of how the whole thing from the flight that was delayed all the way through not being able to find my tickets for McAllister at my friend's house to borrowing his car and almost killing his car in Pelham, Alabama. It was like wild, not even to mention the music, which was out of control. And it just you're in a situation where through 1993, really all the way up into 1995, it just felt like every night was better than the last, right? It was like, how can they possibly be better tomorrow? And then they were better tomorrow. And to me, that was something I had never experienced with anything before, where I had come across a band that was so different every night, and it just was getting better and better. And I was going to see some Grateful Dead for context at that time. And, that was for me past the peak of the Grateful Dead, and I just couldn't get into it. And Phish just had this thing that was a trajectory, a rocket ship from, those shows and with 2,000 people right into arenas, and then being able to kind of master the arena thing over those next couple of years. And, I think it arguably for a lot of people, they hit a peak on 12/31/95, which is just this is just unbelievable performance. Right. And so for context, that's when the Disco Biscuits started playing, right? In 95. And so we started to focus on our basement band, right? We were a basement band. We weren't even really playing shows. We would play some fraternity shows through 95 and 1996. It started to pick up a little bit, and I was getting to see less and less Phish in 96, as compared to it being the focus of my life in 1993 and 1994. Every break, everything was about where to get Phish. 1997 rolls around, and I'm seeing even less of Phish, because now in the spring of 1997 we go on a 10-show tour, our first tour, and now we're really focused on, this is a band, we're going to play shows, this is what I remember thinking, how are we going to get our own sound? How does that even happen? And part of the thing is you have to stop going to see the things that are influencing you so much, and focus more on your own thing. And
did you play Wetlands then on that tour?
Yes. So
I saw you on your first tour.
I think that our Wetlands show was in January of 1997, January 29th or something of 1997. And then there was a smattering of them. We were coming through Wetlands
September, you were there?
Of 97?
Yeah. My birthday
September of 97. And then
27th.
Right. And then we were pining for the post Phish shows, 12/29, 12/30, 12, those were the shows you really wanted to get if you were a young jam band at that point. And we didn't get it in 97. Mo and like Strange Folk, they all had those slots, but it was 12:29 and 12:30 of 1998. So we didn't get there that we finally got that Wetlands post Phish late night. And that was career trajectory changing kind of thing for us. But in fall of 97, I went to look through last night. I don't even know how many shows. I said to Benji 5, but I think it might have been 4, and I'm not even sure. There's only 3 that I can confirm definitely that I was at from looking at the set list. And that may sound weird, but it like with hundreds of shows and then another 1,700 of Biscuit shows, it all kind of blends together, right? And so like when Benji asked to talk about 97, part of the reason I was reluctant was I wasn't connecting with it. The things were happening that were bothering me. And so just remember, to everybody who thinks this is crazy or you're an idiot or how can you even be saying this publicly, I've already stated up front that I'm the type of person that can admit when I'm wrong. But there were things that I remember. So it's like the Maya Angelou quote. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Right. So like I have forgotten what Phish played through those shows, but I didn't forget how it made me feel. And how it made me feel was confused a little bit at times. There were things that were happening at every single show, and I couldn't wrap my head around things happening at every single show. That was yes, there were certain things that you knew inevitably were going to happen at Phish, like a big kind of dissonant jam that came out into consonance on one peaky note, right? Like you knew that this was going to happen at some point through the course of the show. And you know, I think I was like almost like addicted to those moments. And then Phish comes out and slows everything down and starts like getting into the pocket. But there were little triggers for me, like the whammy bar delay loop at the beginning of the funk jams was like a signal that they were going to be doing a certain thing over the next 10 minutes or so. And I started to, as a fan, like react to that negatively. Like it would happen and I'd be like, oh, now I know the next 10 minutes are going to have a funk jam. Then there's going to be a stop. And then like one of the guys, either guitar or like keyboards, is going to play through the stop. And then they're going to come back out. And, you know, it was almost like those moments were popping up in every jam. That's how I remember it, by the way. I've now listened and I know that they were doing the smart thing. They were picking their spots and doing this new kind of jam. But like, to me, I saw 4 shows. It happened like 8 times. And by the core states, like the Spectrum shows on 12/2 and 12/3, I had felt jaded for the first time as a Phish fan. I started to feel like I wasn't getting everything that I needed to get out of the show. And now, I'll pause for a second to say, I do recognize now that this was about me and not about what Phish was doing. Like all of this is like going on in your head, right? And it's like, I recognize now, like 20 years later, that this is like, it doesn't matter what I think, right? Like I then come to find out 5 or 7 or 8 years later that Fall 97 is revered as the greatest tour of all time. And I'm thinking to myself, what did I miss? And I'll tell you what I missed. I missed great shows by one night 4 times. I missed the Runaway Gym in Worcester by one night. I missed like everything that people were coming out of the show and be like, last night was the greatest show I ever saw. And then I would go and the show wasn't the greatest. And that's the nature of Phish. Right? So this is the nature of jam bands. It's the nature of improvisational music. Some nights are going to be the best and some nights aren't. And unless you go to all of them, you can't guarantee. But if you go to 4 or 5, you can roll the dice like that. You know you're going to like pretty much get something amazing. And you know what? I did. That's what I've come to find out because I've gone back to listen to these shows and they were amazing. Right? Well, they were amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you nailed it in that, you know, your experience is not singular and that a lot of people that I've talked. I mean, we've used the same language on this podcast in the past, saying, there was a period where every night felt like Phish was a better and better and better band, and that may have ended after New Year's Eve '95, when every single night you walked out. And another surprise that we had on this season of Undermine is that there are certain shows that we learned that are historic, and at the same time, when we go back and listen to them, Tom will tell you that if he was there that night, he would have wanted a refund from his comp ticket. And Brownie, there is I think you're actually talking about an experience that I had with you, because I remember raving to you about that Runaway Jim, and then the next night, the third night of Worcester, which was the previous show before the show we're about to talk about, was an anomaly. It was that heavy metal, and I mean, I loved it, but it wasn't for everybody.
Well, here's what's funny. When you said, can we talk about Fall 97? I said to myself, okay, what do I remember? I remember Bryce Jordan's show was like not that my favorite. It wasn't that strong of a show. Weird energy inside of the Bryce Jordan set. So I'm sure when I get to listen back to it, I'm sure it'll be great too, because it's Phish and it's all pretty good. Like there's moments of greatness in every show, obviously, and that stands true at this point. But I remember that. I didn't remember really much about the Core State show, just the Spectrum show off of the top of my head. But I remembered that in the show that I was at in Worcester, the lights turned off in the middle of something. I didn't remember what it was. And then they went into a heavy metal jam and started singing or saying the words of Sanity. I remember clearly.
Wolfman's Brother.
And it was in this 31-minute Wolfman's Brother, which is really a great like piece of music, including the heavy metal part is so out of the blue and different, and the Sanity and like funnily, like the thing that was most memorable to me musically about that whole entire run was them singing Sanity lyrics or saying Sanity lyrics over this heavy metal jam. I remembered that. I remembered the music of that clearly. Another thing that I remember clearly upon re-listen is the way that I felt during the Down with Disease in the Spectrum show, because it brought up a lot of these feelings that I was having about, the peak, right? Like it's like all about these peak, moments that you would get out of these Phish shows, like in 93 to 95, and every night was peakier and every night was faster and every night was better. And then like, this was so different, and it had a profound effect on me artistically that has a long lasting effect for Disco Biscuit fans that they probably don't even know about, and that was the Spectrum show. That's the show that you want to talk about, which is 12-2. And when Benji asked me, Tom, to talk about the Spectrum show, I said, can I talk about one of the shows that I like really remember? But it's funny, going back and listening to the show, of course, it jogs your memory pretty quick.
I'm the same way as you. In many ways, what you're saying and what you said about the years prior to this, I mean, I never, until this season of Undermine, I never really had Fall of 97 on my radar as that is Phish's best tour. And I don't even like think that way. I was never a tape collector. And so I completely understand everything you're saying, but I definitely had, and Benji referenced it already, I had probably a string of 3 years where I thought Phish was getting better every single time I saw them. And I was just like, this, I don't know anything else in the world like this. But for sure, I was there. We were probably right next to each other at this show.
We were next to each other so many times.
Must have been so many.
I mean, not must have been, were, because I know who you are. And like, and you're, it's like you're a taller guy, and it's like you stumble accidentally into like the friends and family, 10th row at the Man or whatever. And
try not to step on your best friend's feet.
Exactly. So I mean, I didn't know how the 92 to 95, like, first generation 1.0, whatever we call it now, Phish fans felt about 96, 97. But what I do know is that people who what I know is that Phish exploded in 97. And there was a ton of new fans. And to those people who came on right then for that next 6 years, Fall 97 is the grail, right? And there's a lot of people that Fall 97 is the grail for. And I've, I have a lot of respect for that. I respect those fans' opinions enough to have gone back over the years and, listened to a lot of the 97, the Nutter Center, a lot of the shows that people consider great, and come to realize that I was just messed up in my head. I couldn't, it was different and it was great. It was just hard to come from that better every night, stretch into what felt like maybe I didn't know if it was better every night. I didn't left turn.
Know. They definitely, they'd made a turn.
They made a turn.
Well, you know what's funny? What's funny is I don't remember the music, but it's my memory of what was going on in that week. I remember Benji clearly backstage with Mike Gordon at the TLA talking about the Runaway Jim from Worcester and comparing it to the 50-minute meet that Mo had just recorded and put out. And I think I can't remember which one was longer, but I think Meat was longer and Benji was like, you almost beat Meat or whatever it was.
I remember that.
But I remember that. And I remember this amazing experience that I had a friend who worked at the Spectrum named Melissa Wilson, who was friends with Mike. And over the course of that Philly run, took me to the Four Seasons and brought me to Mike's room, and we went out to the bus. And I remember everything from that so vividly, all of the conversations that I had with Mike. And so it's my memory of that week it's actually objectively one of the better weeks that I remember of anything that's happened in my life. But the music kind of blended together somehow, oddly, there's outside of certain things, but it is a great show. 12 too. How do you go through it? What's your process?
Well, let's see. Let's talk about that first set. I mean, it opened with Buried Alive, and it had a wild segment right off the bat with Down with Disease into Makisupa, Policeman, a short but incendiary chalk dust torture, and then a ghost that was the first cow funk showcase of the night. Marc, just sticking on this set, what did you think of set one?
Okay, so I had some issues with it, and again, that were issues with me. But here's the things that kind of were hard for me. First of all, Buried Alive was great. I love a great Buried Alive opener, and it comes and it hits and it's great. And then the excitement at the beginning of Down with Disease was palpable, and the jam actually was a great jam. But then there's that moment in the jam where he goes into the reverse whammy delay, and I had thought at that moment, I was like, oh, we're going into a cow funk section here, and I was admittedly jaded about the cow funk sections at that point. And I need to give you a little context. I'm from Manhattan, and I went to jazz school in Manhattan at the New School for 2 semesters after my freshman year. While I was getting into Phish, I was learning about jazz from all these jazz greats, right? The guys that a lot of them aren't alive anymore, because this is 1992. They were Chico Hamilton and Reggie Workman, all these dudes. Some of them are alive. And jazz is my world, and classical too, but this is my world. But there's all these New York City bands, even Boston bands that are playing at the Wetlands, Mexican Mud Band and Chakra and The Authority, and who I love The Authority. They were my favorite band at the time, but nonetheless, they were these funk, Milo Z, they were funk bands that were based off of funk guitar chords, right? And I loved it. I was really deeply into the scene. I went to see all that stuff. But when I discovered Phish, they were musically, to me, on a different level than that. They were on this jazz classical level. And I put that on a pedestal over people trying to play funk from the 70s now and the 90s. To me, it was oh, now there's people trying to play this funk music from the 70s, and it's good, but it's kind of watered down funk a little bit, the jam band scene funk, and all the other jam bands Sea Pods, Free Beer and Chicken, Percy Hill. They all relied on the wah-wah funk guitar as their like backbone. It was like the backbone of the jam band scene. And everybody, they all did it, and we were like we kind of pushed against that. We like resisted against being a wah-wah funk band at that time because that was like what it was, and we didn't want to be like everybody else. Then Phish comes along with like this heightened sensibility of jazz and classical music, and like compositional like beauty.
I can see where this is going.
Yeah.
All of a sudden,
then
they drop into
suddenly
funk.
They're playing wah-wah funk guitar, which was what I was going not to see them for. I was going to them because they were not that. So now, listen, wah-wah funk guitar is the fucking greatest thing of all time. And like, like at any time where I feel like there's a moment in the Biscuit Show where we're maybe straying too far or need a little bit of direction or need a little bit of a rhythm, I'll give Barber the like, look down at his wah-wah, or he'll just know, like he knows when to go over and get on the wah-wah and just center us and ground us in like a pocket. And that's now. I get it now because it's 25 years later and I've gone down a deep, deep hole, like, deep into the funk hole, like, over the last bunch of years. But at this point I was trying to get away from it. So I hear that in Down with Disease, and I'm like, oh, here we go. But I think even worse than going into the cow funk for me was they kind of petered the jam out and then kind of slipped into Maki Supa, which actually on re-listen is a sick transition. It's super cool, but that's not what I wanted. What I wanted was for them to take Down with Disease to the very peak of Down with Disease, come back in, play the guitar line, and sing the chorus and play the end of the song. Yeah. Like that's the payoff of sitting through, 17 minutes of guitar noodling. There's a payoff to all of this jamming, and they changed the formula. It was like, whoa, the formula is different here. Now, as an artist, 25 years later, I have the utmost respect for the conviction that it takes to change the formula and stick with it and actually prove that the early fans were wrong. Like they're, it's like that. Benji says maybe not. Because
well, I mean, I don't think the early fans are wrong. Like I remember in '97, it was almost like Marc with your band. I specifically and vividly remember that you guys were searching, to your credit, immense credit, and probably in my mind, one of the biggest reasons why you achieved the success you did is you were searching for something original. But by doing that, I remember at the time electronic music, which wasn't something I was into, but some of the crowd that you were hanging out with was, and I remember you talking and having conversations with your bandmates about, hey, let's take this element and put this with this. And with Phish, to me, after '95, that to me, maybe because that's when I got into them as well, as a similar timeline as you. And they were just
so unbeatable. You're jaded too. You're jaded in '97.
It was but it was a different way of looking at it, because in '97 it turned into a dance party. And
I was going to say, for your dance style, Benji, that cow funk is perfect. That became the bedrock upon which your Phish experience was built on, was that slow down funk. You and Carlin, the whole crew, if they would go into a funk beat, it erupts. It erupts.
But Brownie, the dance moves you're talking about, I literally it was from the MoMA dance. It was because the band was playing cow funk that influenced.
And the MoMA dance came out of what was
Black
the song?
Eyed Katie.
Black Eyed Katie, which was kind of the jam that we're talking about.
That's exactly right.
Cow funk jam with the stops and stuff. Now, do they mark Black Eyed Katie in the set list, or is that just like the jam that keeps popping up from show to show?
It's Black Eyed Katie. Yep.
Okay. It had a name. Yep.
Okay. So, for me, like it all sounded like Black Eyed Katie at that point. Like, they would go into the cow funk and it was like they were playing Black Eyed Katie again and again and again. And but they didn't peak that Disease. And for me, that was like a defining moment, because I remember the feeling of like wanting it. And then I was even thought maybe the end of disease is going to come back at the end of the second set. And I always view, or at the end of the first set. And I just always viewed that as a missed opportunity in that moment. Like, can you imagine how the spectrum would have erupted if, like, at the end of, say, Taste, they started, like, working their way back towards disease, and then peaked the disease out. I mean, it would have been pandemonium in that place had they done that, right? But like, again, like, I'm not deciding what happens at a Phish show, but I do have that power at our own concerts. And right, so like, we took that moment and we were like, hey, listen, let's just remember to close things up at the end of the set. Just like, I remember wanting it. And then we were able to turn around and, and
let's have a band, unlike Phish, that promises a payoff. We'll actually pay.
Yeah. No,
well, listen, I don't know. I don't know. Phish has done pretty good for themselves, and it's
that tension and release is what drew so many of us in to begin with, and that payoff is that payoff makes you a rich man if it happens.
So what do you think about the Chalk Dust, though? Do you think like the Chalk Dust had enough tension and release to take that? Like, for me, that was the jam of the set. That was kind of like a 93, 94, 95 jam, right? It was, I don't even know if it's considered a jam, but it's just like, it's a Chalk Dust.
It was a jam, and going back and re-listening to all these 97 shows, we think of it as the Califunk tour, but they still displayed they had a bag of tricks, and so they added a new trick, and they were focusing on the new trick because it was like getting a new toy where you want to play with it all the time, but they still used all of the bag of tricks that they had, and so they still would do tension and release jams. They still would have the humor. They still would have, Fishman would still come out and play vacuum solos, and they had all the elements of Phish. They just were adding to it. Mark and Tom, I'm looking at the time, and I'm about to take us to a break, but to a very quick commercial break. But before we do it, Brownie, you mentioned the taste in that set, and that reminded me that, Tom, for 25 years, this is an opportunity for me to put you on the hot seat, because for 25 years, I've wondered this. You wrote Taste, right? And then Fishman, I think, wrote Fog That Surrounds. And then the two were merged, and it was the same music for Fog That Surrounds, and Fishman was singing it. And then we'll see where this ends up. But you write the song with Trey. Phish plays it throughout the summer of ~95, and it's not an easy song to play. It's different instruments are playing different rhythms. It's pretty amazing. And then complicating it further, during the first few versions of Fall '95, it completely shapeshifted into what seemed like an entirely different song with an entirely different name, because Fishman took over the vocals with his own lyrics. When that happened, did Trey give you a heads up, or did you find out by surprise? Were you at a show and they start playing Taste, and then Fishman starts singing, and you're like, "What's this?"
It's kind of like, is it Vultures with Potato to the Throat? All of a sudden something will happen and I have no idea why, but you opened a huge can of worms here. And I think we should take that break so I can figure out my answer.
Fair enough.
I want to say, I did not know that Taste came. I forgot that Taste came before Fog That Surrounds, because I remember seeing Fog That Surrounds. Oh, no, because I saw it in Jones Beach, Fog That Surrounds, and I was confused. I remember the confusion, and I think not being.
I think there's confusion, and I think it's based on listening to Benji ask that question. I think there's a mistake in there, but let's address it after
take the break.
Have you ever wondered what it would feel like if your investments reflected what matters most to you? At Green Future Wealth Management, the advisors specialize in helping clients manifest their values in their financial lives. Green Future Wealth Management was founded by certified financial planner practitioner and longtime fan Nick Cantrell, named by Forbes as one of the top next-gen wealth advisors in the country. Whether you are just getting started or have complex investing and financial planning needs, visit them on the web at greenfuturewealth.com. You can sign up for the email list or take the Investing Values quiz. When you feel ready, schedule a free virtual consultation. In appreciation for the amazing Phish community and the incredible work being done by fans across the country, Green Future Wealth Management will be donating 10% of asset management proceeds from new Osiris listener clients to Fans for Racial Equity. Just be sure to mention Osiris when booking your appointment. Create your green future. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research Inc., member FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors Inc. Cambridge and Green Future Wealth are not affiliated.
And we are back. We are here with the Disco Biscuits, Marc Brownstein, and our mutual friend and co-host Benji Eisen, who just asked me about Taste, the song Taste, turning into Fog That Surrounds before it turned back into Taste. And like I said before, I think there was a misconception that Phish wrote a song that was combined with Taste. I don't think that really ever happened. Now, I can't explain why suddenly there's a song, Fog That Surrounds, and even one called Taste That Surrounds. I guess different performances were given different titles, but to me, they're all Taste. So let me tell you what I think happened. Scott Herman, and my lyric writing pal, and I had given Trey a book filled with hundreds of poems and poem fragments called The Salamander Prince. And Trey used this to fuel his songwriting all the way through Ghost and Farmhouse. And then we gave him another book called Walls of the Cave with more songs, but that's another story. But so for the recording of Billy Breathes, Phish got really experimental in the studio with Steve Lillywhite and John Sickett, and they created this long, amazing piece of music they called The Blob. And it was really cool. And eventually Swept Away, Steep, Taste, and I think Prince Caspian, and possibly a few more songs that never saw the light of day came out of that primordial blob of music. But they needed lyrics. So Trey just threw his copy of Salamander Prince into the room and the band like grabbed it and started going through it. And it was the first time the band members had access to Scott's and my poems. And so they later used it for like Frankie Says and some other songs too. But anyway, back to Taste. I wrote all those lyrics, but I do think they came from two separate poems. And maybe Phish brought the second poem into the song Taste. Or maybe he was just the singer of that second part. But either way, the part that causes the controversy in Taste is the part that Phish sings. And it's after the I'm out and I will stay here alone and without someone controlled by the phone and TV, because what it's doing to me is fine, because I can see through the lines. So right after that, it goes into the controversial part, which is, ooh, step into space. But I kind of figure out what's happening. I went back and figured out what's happening. So he's singing every other line of a poem that I'd written the full thing, but he only took his parts out. So I think at one point, Trey was probably doing a back and forth with him where he would sing one line and then Phish would sing the other. But what wound up in Taste was just Phish's half. So Benji, I just sent you the original poem, and I was thinking maybe we could help people make sense of this if I do Trey's line, which didn't wind up in Taste, and you do Fishman's line, and we'll read the whole poem.
If it's the just the lyrics that Fishman sings, I can probably do it by heart. But okay, I'll pull this up.
Okay, here goes. So this should make sense. That the lines I read never wound up in the final song.
One question before we start this: you said earlier when you were singing the lyrics, because I can see through the lines. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I always there's always this ambiguity to me in that it was I can see through the light. I can't see through the light. I can see through the lies.
I think it was the lines. I think the line TV, like someone controlled by the phone and TV, but I can see through the lines of the TV to the other bigger picture.
I always assumed it was I can see through the light.
Oh,
yeah, through the light. Yeah.
That's a fine misinterpretation as far as I'm concerned. All right. So
I've been misinterpreting you for 25 years.
And we're coming into our 40th year of misinterpretation coming up.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. I'm going to read you Trey's part, which didn't make it in the song. Benji's part is what is in Taste. Okay. Down on myself again.
Step into space.
Wondering how I can
alter my place
in this hall of creation
that someone else made,
who's probably wondering
why I have stayed
and never progressed
into things I could be
if I found the right partner,
or if I could see
beyond my four walls
into fog that surrounds.
My need for redemption
pins me to the ground.
So if you take out just every other line like Phish did, it becomes
now. Are we sure? are we sure there's not a version out there where I think we got to go back and start listening to the early versions of Taste, because I would like to find a version where the whole poem is in there.
I think
the whole ones, the very beginning of Fall 95, when fans, myself included, when we were calling it the fog that surrounds, it was, and I remember it had all of the lyrics that we just went both parts that Fishman sang. And because Fishman sang it, it was a popular, I guess, misconception now, but that I've had until today. And that's that Fishman must have written those lines and co-opted the song for his own purposes.
Well, I got to tell you that I was going to 100% go and find that, because in my head, there was no way that I hadn't heard your lines before, Tom.
Okay,
I was 100% to the point where I heard them coming before you said them. So
I got so used to the studio version of Taste that became the definitive version for me. And that doesn't have those. So yeah. Maybe I never heard Fog That Surrounds or Taste That Surrounds. Maybe they had them playing in the Midwest somewhere. Anyway, so I guess versions with all those lyrics have been played and have been called things other than Taste. But to me, they're just different versions, different incarnations of Taste.
Yeah, it's all Taste to me too. It feels like it felt like it was just Taste. They kept changing the name, and they needed to. That, like, as a fan, it felt more like they were trying to figure out what the name of the song was.
Yeah.
Than that the song was dramatically changing.
Well, it's a wild ride. Tom, you wrote it, and I will have you know that Phish.net notates the evolution as Taste, and then Fog That Surrounds, and then Taste That Surrounds. But then by this night that we're talking about, 12/2/97, it's back to Taste again, with that extra Fishman verse that we just did, the lines that I was doing.
Oh.
And I re-listened to the show, of course, the other night, and it's a great Taste. It's typical of Taste in that it's typically great. It doesn't it's typically straightforward, but it still is just a phenomenal song, and what all the instruments are doing. It's a first set song.
Yeah, and to your point too, Benji, it's like just goes to show like how your memories can be skewed over the years, because like they hit Taste here and they just hit it perfectly, right? And like and even Dirt before it, and even Divided Sky before that. Like really, if you want to go through the whole set, like the Ghost had the cow funk, and the only thing that listening back I would have said to myself, like, I would have liked again for Ghost to have come back around and finished rather than kind of, I guess, not like jarringly, because it sounded like the jam just kind of went major. And then suddenly, like about 2 bars later, it's like, oh, wow, we're like in Divided Sky here, and then they nailed Divided Sky. I mean, nail it. Right. And it's like, these were the days when you could count on Divided Sky just being perfect every time. And like, as a fan, that perfection of these incredibly intense compositional sections is what, I mean, in a lot of ways drove me as a musician to try to continuously get better, because you're seeing these people doing like the seemingly impossible. Right. And then Dirt hit, and I'm like never not a fan of a first set Dirt. And then Taste was perfect, but like objectively, it wasn't like a blow it out, first set. Would you consider this like a blow it out, like over the top? Wow, I can't believe how great this first set was, or is it? This is a good set.
I think it was a good set. I think and there's different ways of judging it, but if you look at like which songs have been recognized with a jam chart, they all occur in the second set of this show. There's like 4 that have the extra analysis that Jam Charts affords. And that's something on Phish.net. And there were none in that first set, even though I, like you, Mark, I like the first set quite a bit. But we took our set break already. So let's dive into set 2.
Set 2.
Yeah. So Mark, the meat of this second set is a segued Mike's Groove that has the pretty wild sequence of Mike's Simple, Dogface Boy, Yamar, and then finally Wikipog. And none of these versions you could call normal. What were your thoughts about that night?
Well, I like the tension in Mike's song. I like the sort of understated peak that they hit, and it wasn't like an over the top like tension release like into a massive like one note, and maybe even like replay that out 3 times to like a bigger one note, and then ultimately you like the note where you're like, oh, I thought we hit the note, and then you're like, oh, I thought we hit the note, and then it's like, here's the note, it's undeniable.
That's like 2001.
This is the one.
That's like 2001.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. And so they did like kind of a tension thing, and then they come up in this in before the segue into Simple, they hit like a note, but it's not like the biggest one you've ever heard. And then they drop back down into like that F sharp, right? And it almost sounds like they're about to go right there into whatever's coming next. Who knows what's going to come next? Simple is a good guess, though. If you're at the show, you at this point you think Simple might be the thing, and but no, they don't. They kind of wind it back up again, and then it starts to get out there, like kind of dissonant, and then ultimately it drops down into Simple. And the thing about Simple that is, Simple's an epic, beautiful song, but it's a reverse peak, right? Like it starts kind of at this high place, and then the jam like consistently goes down in energy and down in energy and down in energy, right? And that's like the opposite of what Phish formulaic, improv was. And this was kind of the first song that ever was brought into maybe the only song that I could think of in Phish's catalog. I admittedly don't know their later catalog as well as I know the early catalog, but where they started high up in a glorious kind of peaky place and then went in the other direction.
I never thought of Simple that way. It does make sense. Like it's like triumphant in the beginning. We've got it Simple, and then we got it.
Well, especially on this night, because one of the hallmarks of the font was when one of the hallmarks of this tour was when people would drop out of the jam, right? And all of a sudden it just be too. And in this Simple, in a very understated way, there's this section where it is Trey and Paige, and it's not like in Ghost or one of these big moments when all of a sudden it's very obvious that everybody drops out except maybe Mike and Phish or Paige, and instead it wasn't a
breakdown. That's a breakdown. In Ghost, it's a cowfunk breakdown, right? That was like This wasn't. I mean, this is technically considered a breakdown. But it flowed naturally out of the Simple into like kind of the two of them just jamming, right? But go back and listen to some Simples from like the very beginning through those first couple of years. Like they formulaically brought the energy down throughout the course of the jam in a very beautiful, methodical, simple way. But it wasn't the start at the bottom and work your way up to a peak. And so I didn't know where the set was going to go at this point. Right. And then Dogface Boy kind of throws you for a loop in the middle of a second set. Right. I'm like, okay, but it's Dogface Boy and you're doing it. The Yamar actually, like the jam gets really sick. Like it's like Yamar goes in some places. And I think what happens next was what threw me for the loop the most in the set, which was they jammed Yamar pretty seamlessly back into Weekapog, but they're playing Weekapog at a very slow tempo, very slow. And almost you don't notice how slow it is until, so they come into Weekapog, Trey plays the chords, right? Like the 4 times, and then they start singing it. And when they're singing it, you could really feel how much slower it is than a regular Weekapog, almost to the point where it's like a different song, but it's beautiful and cool and different. But I can see myself at that time, like just wanting to hear Weekapog the way Weekapog's supposed to be. Right. And like, I know like myself as a fan, I like Weekapog is the payoff. Now we're talking about the payoff again. You go through Mike's Hydrogen or Mike's, Jerusalem or Mike's, Simple or whatever goes in the middle there in between Mike's and Weekapog. And there's something, fun and weird and, dynamic, most importantly, like that's the thing about the Mike's Weekapaug. It's like Mike's is dark, right? And sick. And then whatever happens in the middle, it's dynamic. It's not meant to be like the peak of the set. It's not. It's the antithesis of that intentionally. It's the spot where your friend, hands you a bowl or a cigarette, if that's what was your thing back in the 90s, or like whatever. Everybody takes a drink, and whatever it is, that's your moment to take a breath. And then it stops. And Mike comes in with Weekapaug, and it's like crazy fast and furious and energetic. And this Weekapaug was decidedly not fast. And actually, the end of this Weekapaug was faster than like a regular Weekapaug. It starts slower than a regular Weekapaug, and it ends faster. And I can tell you from being in a band why that is. It's because when you're not starting it from scratch with the person who starts it, like setting the tempo every time, you're feeling the tempo out. And so if you're slower, when you hit those changes, you're slower. And I think they did the right thing and let it, like, not just immediately speed it up and like let it be what it was. But when you're speeding up to find the tempo, it's very easy to pass that tempo. Like, try finding the right spot while you're speeding up. It tends to blow past that.
You tend to overshoot. That's cool.
Yeah, but the end of this Weekapaug actually is very fast. It's like I don't know, I got to go with a BPM, but it's like sounds like it's above 140, maybe even as fast as 150 or 160 beats per minute, which like the Biscuits have a lot of peaks in that range, like, Basis for a Day and Munchkin Invasion and Above the Waves, where like those are like the faster songs, the faster peaks. And I as a disco biscuit, I really appreciate how fast that Weekapaug got. And like, and it was shredding, right? Like
it sounded for a moment like they were going to go into Isabella.
Yeah, I didn't hear that because I'm not as heady as you, but like,
yeah, I didn't
like, yeah, I didn't hear that, but like,
there's a distinct moment there. Where
on the slower side, on the
faster side.
Okay, on the faster side. I mean, it really ramps up. And for me, like that moment where it goes from slow to fast is like the pinnacle moment of this set. That's that's the moment that like hit me and like okay, here we go. Like, and it's like, I don't want to sound like the only thing I want them to do is peak. Certainly I don't. Like, I like I like the journey as much as the destination, like that's as an improv musician, I almost prefer the journey part as I do to the peak part. And as a fan, like the real magic occurs in the journey.
Absolutely.
And the peak is just it's just like a way to wrap it up and cap it and say we're done.
Exclamation mark. Yeah.
It's how you say we're done. It's the end of the set. So they really did just an incredible job coming out of that slow Weekapaug into that fast Weekapaug. And I mean, if you want to hear a Weekapaug that's a little too slow and a little too fast, this is your Weekapaug, right? This is the one. I mean, and I'd say like the Yamar, the combination of the simple and the Yamar and the like, what are the jams? What are the four that go on the what do you call it? The jam chart
charts.
Or the jam? What are the four that are on the jam charts?
Mike, Simple, Yamar, and Weekapaug. And I think Dogface was even mentioned as being unusual and
the most unusual Dogface boy that I know of.
Yeah, and being beautifully segued into and out of.
Yeah.
Beautifully segued into and out of, right? And very unusual.
Yeah.
But unusual in a way that almost like was confusing. Like, again,
normally it's like to me, it's an acoustic song or a very quiet song. And this one had the whole band. And I think even Trey might have surprised the band when he started to sing it against those chords. I think he got them used to it one time around. He played the chords to let them know something was coming, and maybe they picked it up. They probably did, but I didn't.
I remember being very confused by it when they started singing it because you don't recognize that that's what it is until in the hindsight, but because it's a different tempo and the just everything about it's an alternate version of it that was kind of invented and made up on the spot. And then not that we need to do
almost like the Sanity the night before the show before, right? It was like almost like this is what Trey was doing in these improv sections, was like reinventing songs.
That's exactly right.
In the middle of these jams
and bits and pieces of them, which of course, the Disco Biscuits are so adept at. Now, not that we need to do the play-by-play because this podcast is more about the color commentary, but then we have the bouncing around the room, and then Chalk Does Torture puts the exclamation mark on
Character Zero.
Thank you. That's what I meant. Character Zero.
Yeah, and I feel like it's an interesting choice for them to then, after that Weekapog, which, arguably could have been the end of a short set. Like at that point in the set, I was like, wow, we're done, right?
And they were doing 4-song second sets on this tour. They were only an hour long.
We were done. I was halfway out the door. I was like, but I felt like after that, because like Bouncin' and Character Zero and Sample all kind of fit into like the heady fans like bucket of like poppier songs that maybe that not everybody's looking forward to. Like happy, love all three songs, happy to hear any of them at any point in any set, right? But they're not the big improv like launch.
They're not going to be the highlight.
Or they're just like it's not the highlight of the show. It's just a nice. And they're great filler songs.
They're
right?
also
like
great
these are
Phish songs. They're great Phish songs. They're calling cards saying this is what we do. But then live,
maybe one of them in a set. Like, so seeing three come in rapid succession like that at the very end of the show, like as a fan, I was a little confused there too. I was like, oh wow, that was like a weird ending. Like after that crazy jammed out set, they kind of decided to just turn on a dime again and not do any more jams and just straight up like Bouncing, Character Zero, Ginseng, Sample. And at the show, it's fun and like sing along. I'm singing all of the songs on replay, even better. Like, even better on replay. It's like, I'm definitely singing it all. And, but it's a long Phish is a long show, right? Biscuits are a long show. Like jam bands are a long show. And sometimes you might, as a musician, I can say like, sometimes you might get to that point where it's like, we've played 4 jam chart worthy jams in the last hour and 15 minutes. It's time to put an exclamation point on the set with a Bouncing Character Zero. And, I don't think I think arguably they could have just done Character Zero out of after Weekapog and been like, oh, here's that. This will definitely be the set closer, right? That if they play Bounce and something else is going to come after that. But they didn't have to play the Bouncing, which actually is nice because it's almost like a double encore kind of vibe. It's like a double encore at this show, right? Well, like Weekapog's like the end of the set, and then they do like a double encore, then they go off and do another double encore. That's kind of really what happened here.
Marc, you talked about how jam bands like to have long shows, and jam band podcasts can be long too, and we're getting there, but there's a few more questions that we just need to ask you very quickly for the exclamation mark at the end here. And that's that, this is something that I actually can't wait to hear what you have to say about it, because I know that you have a wonderful memory of Mike Gordon from this I think the 2 days, because you were you at one point, I think you were on the bus with him or in the hotel room. Can you tell us the story about him introducing you to quote unquote the funk?
So this is like the culmination of everything that happened on fall of 97 tour, although there was still Bryce Jordan Center to come on the 9th of December after this. But the culmination was I was jaded, but not jaded enough to jump at the chance immediately to go hang out with Mike Gordon. When my friend called me and said, hey, you want to come hang with Mike Gordon? I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Well, of course I do. And so I head down to the city, the old Four Seasons down on Benjamin Franklin Parkway. And I remember this experience like so vividly, but like,
when was
right
this?
down.
When?
So that, I think this had to have been the day off, either before the show or after the show. I don't remember which one, but it was like a day off because everybody was milling about. The band was milling about.
It would have been right before. It would have been between Worcester and this show, December 2nd.
Day off between Worcester and here's what happens. We go into the room and he's got a little basket on his bed. And in the basket is like his folded like underwear and t-shirt like that they did. And I'm like, wow, these guys are fucking rock stars. They get their laundry done and brought in a basket and put on their bed, right? It's, we sit down and we start talking about music, and he tells me that his favorite band, he's like, I'm gonna put my favorite band on for you right now. Great. So he puts on the Gray Boy All-Stars. And I'm like, Gray Boy All-Stars. I love the Gray Boy All-Stars. You know what I mean? Like, saw them at Wetlands with what was the name of the band? I don't even remember who they opened for. That's how good they were, right? It's like when they were like, they stole the show there at that Wetland show. And he like gives me his bass and, hands me his bass, and his friend's there, and he's like starts quizzing me, like pop quiz, but like remediary questions. Like, what's the second most important note in the scale of the bass? And I'm like, the 5? And he's like, that's right, the 5. And I'm like, oh, thank God I got the Mike Gordon quiz right. You know what I mean? And I just kind of like, plucked around on the bass, probably did a little slap and a pop or whatever bass players do to show another bass player that they're like, have some semblance of an idea what they were doing, which, by the way, I did not. I had been to music school, but I learned how to play upright bass in music school. And so like I literally went to music school, learned a bunch of theory about jazz, and then came back and still didn't know how to play bass, and like had to learn. I had to learn on the road. And that's like, 95, 96, 97. So I'm really just learning this instrument at this point. But he was so nice to me. Like he was like, he was like really like welcoming, and mostly so focused on music. Like I remember that, like Mike is solely focused on music and our like conversations. And then he's like, yeah, you want to head out to the bus, smoke some weed? And I was like, do I ever? Like, you know what I mean? Like young Phish, I'm 24 years old, and Phish is my favorite band for the last 5 years. I've seen like 80 shows, and the bass players inviting me as like a contemporary musician to come with him and smoke weed on the bus. And it was such a crazy experience. We walked downstairs, Paige is on the street, right? I'm like, we walk out, and he's like, oh, Paige, how's it going? And Paige is like, hey, they introduced me to Paige. I'm like, I can't believe I'm meeting Paige right now. And only time I think I've really ever met Paige was right there. I've been around him a bunch of different times, but I to be honest, I try not to talk to Phish. Like I've been around the guys a lot and have talked to Mike, the most of anybody in the band. But like I find this is gonna sound weird because like everybody's always trying to become friends with the other musicians that are like, that I want to keep Phish on a pedestal. I want to keep Phish like I don't want them to become my friends. I've never wanted that. Like I know, like, I have friends who are friends with them and easily can like kind of push the issue, but I've just kind of have decidedly pulled back from that, and if I ever see them, I just don't bother them. Like, I saw Mike on the street in Jazz Fest last year, and like, he stopped to say hi, and we talked for 30 seconds, and he went on his way. And it was like, another time at Jazz Fest, we like really got a good hang at a show. And like, it's like, if that happens, great, but I'm not trying to push this issue with my favorite band. They are my favorite band, and I want to be a fan. It's like, I want to keep that fan creator relationship sacred. I
like that you became friends with Mike, though. The bass players are pals. That's cool.
It's just he's the guy that's there. Like, he's the one that comes out. He's the one that shows up. And like, I've ended up. So let's go back to so we're walking up. The buses are like in the middle of the parkway, right? And we like have to go out, and he's like entering his code. I've never been on a tour bus before, right? We go in the tour bus, and we go like walk through the bunks, right? And we sit down in the back, and I like, amazingly, like, I don't think they're at the point yet in their career where they each have their own tour bus, right? Nope, they're all in this tour bus together.
Yep.
And which is wild to me, like thinking that they're playing like MSG and the Spectrum, and they don't have their own buses, because now there's no band plays like arenas of that size and doesn't everybody have their own bus. But it's the fact was, that was what led to this whole cow funk thing, right? This is the insight that I got from Mike, which I feel so special to have had this experience. But he sits me down and he takes out this little glass bowl and packs it with like some weed and hands it to me. And he's like, so, after every show, this is what we do. We come back here into this back lounge and he like presses this VHS tape into this VHS machine. He's like, turns the thing on. He's like, we got this video here, and Fishman makes the whole band watch the whole entire video every single night. You want to watch it? And I'm like, yeah, like, do I want to sit with Mike Gordon in the back of the Phish tour bus and watch the video that he watches with his bandmates after every single show every night? Like, and if this ever gets back to Mike, like, I apologize if some of these details might be fuzzy or whatever, but like everything I'm saying is how I remember it. We sit kind of in silence because now he got stoned. And I got stoned. And so like now it starts to get a little awkward because it's like I am a big fan of his, and now I'm stoned and he's stoned, and we stop talking really. And we just zone in on this video. And he plays this whole video. It's like 45 minutes or like an hour, packs a bowl once or twice more. And we sit down there and like in the middle of the video, they're like playing. It's James Brown, by the way. Reveal.
Yeah, what's the video?
The video is a live James Brown performance. And it's this incredible live James Brown performance where it's like all, like if you know James Brown at all, it's like, it's heavy James Brown. It's like, with the JBs and the whole entire thing. But there's this one section of the video where they're all in the funk and they're just sitting in the funk. And then James Brown like calls like, a breakdown, like breakdown 2, 3. And then the whole thing breaks and the guitarist starts playing like funk guitar by himself. And then they come out of it, boom, and he's like, this is like the section that, we're all like trying to like mimic and he was basically said like, we're watching this and we're making an attempt to slow ourselves down and play funk authentically by copying the master, and how can you argue with that, right? It was like once it was, straight from the horse's mouth. Like this is an attempt to incorporate a different style of music that we aren't the best at playing, or weren't the best at playing, or just never like did this before. But we're copying a James Brown performance into our shows every night, and that was like that was like the inspiration for all of this cow funk, according to Mike, of course.
Well, Trey just said the same thing. Yeah, we just interviewed Trey and he said the same thing. He mentioned specifically the bus parties and that James Brown was the fuel for those parties. He said the exact same thing. Yeah. So you're vindicated, validated, all the V words.
I feel like, I remember I remember it so vividly. And it's like funny to listen back to the show and be like, I can like hear Mike's voice, all the words that he was telling me about this James Brown thing, because it was shattering for me. It was like earth shattering, like, oh God, this is what's going on. This is why you guys have changed. And they hadn't even really changed. They were just like once or twice a night we're doing this thing. And I relate deeply to this because the Disco Biscuits really haven't changed either. But like we do our tractor beam jam in the second set for like a year or two, where it's like we take a spot and it's like our drum space, but our drum space is like a composed house mix of like from like Carl Cox set or something. We'll take like 10 minutes of a Carl Cox house music DJ set and we'll learn it note for note and then we'll play it. And to us, it's like banging. It's house music. We pick great segments, learn them note for note, and perform them. But it becomes like predictable that that's going to happen in the show every night. And then, so I relate deeply to like being like inspired by something musically and then like changing what you're doing in a very small part of a 4-hour show. And then having fans like me be like, what are they doing? And then like, you go back and listen. It was like for like 17 minutes out of 4 hours, they put this one thing in that became a little bit predictable, and it affected my whole experience on that tour. And like, you know, it gives me empathy for the fans who go through this with the Disco Biscuits when we like try to make a big change, and and the fans like resisted, or like, you know, have like resistance to what we're trying to do. I have like a intense, deep amount of like empathy and connection for what they're going through. And, you know, and I just like, you know, I guess I would say like put some context on it and like, you know, listen back. You know, most of what's happening is what happened here was what I was going for. Like they did deliver. The payoff was there, but something was wrong with me. And but you know, like sense. Again, it seems like something was wrong with a lot of us, Benji. It seems like we were all having this internal struggle about like what our favorite band was deciding to do. And you know what you get to eventually is, you know, you're a fan. You don't get to decide.
Marc, I'm keeping an eye on the time, and we do have to wrap up. However, no, there's just one or two more questions that I think that Tom and I have to ask, and that is, there's just on this exact same thread that you're talking about, even though we're making a jump, but jumping ahead by 24 years, actually jumping ahead by more than 4,000 years, technically. I was with you and some of our, you know, lifelong friends to witness the one and only time that this band Sci-Fi Soldier has ever performed on planet Earth. You know, and we had masks on at the time, but I still remember seeing you smile from underneath the mask. What were some of your thoughts on Sci-Fi Soldier, just very quickly?
Yeah, so when I realized that Phish was going to play a set of music, you know, not unlike Cascot Boxed, where they were creating a new band and creating all new music and going to play it for an arena full of people, again, you know, like not as courageous as like going to war, but like on like a creative, artistic level, a courageous, you know, brave move to do something like that. And I had gone through the mental process of seeing Cascot Vox, you know, what was that, 2 years or 3 years previous to that, in the same room, in much the same situation, me brought out to Las Vegas for my own performances after Phish, and having an opportunity on one of the 4 nights to get to go to the show, the 31st, which is typically the night that we take off on that Phish run. We'll play the first 3. And so I've had a chance to go to that 4th and see whatever the shenanigans that they pull are. I went into that set with a mindset of, I am accepting whatever this is going to be a moment where I put aside all of my own preconceived notions about Phish, all of my own expectations about what I am going to a show for, what I hope to get out of it. I'm putting everything aside, and I'm just going to find the pocket and dance and have a great time no matter what it was. And if you were able to go into that set with that mindset, it was, I mean, it was super funky, kind of like the Halloween stuff that they were doing. What's the one that they do in Atlantic City where they wrote a bunch of new songs for?
Wingsuit.
The Wingsuit. Yep.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, where like there was another one though. Were there 2 in Atlantic City?
There was
like
Chilling Thrilling.
Chilling Thrilling, right? You know, like there's just like a lot of weird stuff was happening, and it's all new and different. I found that there were some really funky, like just like This Is Phish pockets, right? And whereas Castle Box, I really like wasn't sure what was going on. Like I truly was like in the school of people that were like, is this real? Is this not real? I never figured it out. I was confused and like, what is going on here the whole entire time? And I was, you know, I there were certain songs that really connected with me in Cascade Box, you know, that they still play. But yeah, I loved Sci-Fi Soldier. I loved it. And it's funny because we are working on like a space opera as well that is not from the future per se, but or is kind of from the future, but is an alien space opera that the Biscuits are sort of characters in. And And we've been working on it forever. You know what I mean? Like since way before we started it about, I don't know, 5 months before Sci-Fi Soldier happened. We started working on a Disco Biscuit space opera, and then Sci-Fi, and then Phish, you know, of course, did it.
Yeah. Of course.
But it was, I mean, it was great. It was such a fun time. I can't, like, now I'm at a point now where if like I'm looking for them to like just like find some funk pockets and like, you know, and let me get my Benji eyes and like, you know, spin dance on, you know what I mean? Because by the way, something you may not know about me is I have adopted Benji's dance for myself at Phish shows because it's just a perfect kind of groove, right down to every now and then doing a little bit of the spin of the hat.
I was better off not knowing that, I think.
I don't adopt his dance, but we do every now and then. We do. I don't know if it would.
I have to be the arbiter, the time arbiter now. We've not doubled our normal time. We've tripled our normal time allotment. So we do have to. So you win the prize, Mark. You win the absolute prize. But that's going to do it for us today. Do you agree, Benji? Or is there one?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me ramble on.
Thank you, Marc Brownstein, for revisiting December 2nd, 1997 in Philly with us.
Hey, Tom.
Yes, Benji.
One more thing. You just said December 2nd, 1997 in Philadelphia.
I sure did.
Well, it's now that we talked about 12-2 Philly, we have to very briefly, or else RJ's going to kill us. We have to talk about 12-11 just outside of Philly.
Yeah, 25 years and 1 week later, December 11th, 2022. We're all over the place.
Well, not really. We are in the 215. We are on the Philly main line. But we are going back to the future because that will still be 9 days away from when this airs. So your stroll is no longer snapped in half from all the time travel. Where will we be? What am I talking about?
Okay, so you and I and RJ and Mark too, if we can convince him, we'll be in Ardmore, PA on December 11th for a special Undermine live taping as we celebrate the elaborate conclusion of this season.
Elaborate is right. Well, you know, we'll be there. RJ will be there. Megan from HF Pod will be there. And a bunch of Jam Rock All-Stars will be there performing a set of Jam Rock and Calfunk inspired by Phish's Fall 97 tour. It's members of Pink Talking Phish, Dodds in a Pile, Twiddle, maybe some Disco Biscuits, but no promises there. We have to convince them first.
Well, will you do that? No, not yet. He hasn't said yes yet
nothing
either.
Yet. Nothing yet. We have to convince them.
We'll go to work on Mark off mic. But by the way, Mark has already participated in an Osiris live show at the Ardmore Music Hall in the past. But to recap, we are going to be there live on Sunday, December 11th for our final podcast of this Undermine season with tons of live music and not too much talk. We promise. The link for tickets is in the show notes. Thank you, Marc Brownstein, and thanks to the invisible Osiris team that makes this all happen. And I do have to give a nod to our sponsor, Cash or Trade, the world's only social network where fans buy, sell, and trade tickets at face value. So if you have a ticket you don't want or want a ticket you don't have, try your luck at cashortrade.org before going elsewhere. Coming up next, night 2 of Phish's Fall 97 Philly shows. We will see you back here tomorrow. And until then, as they say in Philly, no deals. All right. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you, Benji.
Invite me at your own risk.
Okay, great. You might come, which is great. I think that means on December 11th, we might be seeing members of the Disco Biscuits too. All right.
No promises. But...
All right. No promises. All right. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Osiris.